Good evening, folks. The time has come once again for us to speak of strange things that go bump in the night. Tonight in particular, we have a very interesting location that has all kinds of abnormalities associated with it that comes all the way from Siberia. And it has been nicknamed, in fact, the Valley of Death.
Actually, it's not even so much a nickname as that is what the literal translation of the local area. That's what it literally translates to, is the Valley of Death.
So
just to set it up, I guess.
Well, there you have it, folks. It's quite a well. You can imagine why it has that name, and we will tell you. But before we do, I would just like to mention that for you people who peruse our site, there's been 2 new UFO stories uploaded. They actually came from my Uncle Danny. One story has him spot a UFO in broad daylight, no less. So for me, I found that kind of interesting, usually because it's lights and associated with nighttime activity. But yeah, so there was that one, and there was another one that had him chasing one down the highway, only to pull off on some street where a bunch of people had gathered to witness. You know, actually, it was pretty. It was more than just lights. I'll leave it for you guys to go and check it out. And again, if you have stories, videos, whatever that's weird, paranormal, you can send that to me at will@effedupstories.com or Ryan at effedupstories.com, and we will post it. Probably talk about it on the show. You know, get your face out there, get your name, whatever.
And even things that you don't have much information on, just put it up. We'll, if there's anything there is to add, we'll try and find it and add it. So,
yeah,
something
actually,
that you want to know more about.
Yeah, like if you guys got a topic that's paranormal in nature, whether it's UFOs, conspiracies, whatever, and you'd like to know more about it, or you'd like us to do a show on it, send it to us, and we'll research it and do a show on it. So with that said, I guess we shall start. Well,
I guess the best place to start would be in the central northeastern part of Siberia. That particular area, northwestern Yakutia, Yakutia in Siberia. This is where we find this bizarre basin, and it's interesting now that we're back. We're dealing with a completely different area, but we're back into another basin. The last 2 podcasts are about the Yutina Basin, and this one is the Yakutia Basin.
So basins are pretty bad for paranormal activity, apparently.
Apparently, and this area is we're going to be talking about tonight mostly the Upper Villiuy River, Villiuy.
And actually, yeah, there's a lot of terminology that is translated from the Yucatai. How would you pronounce that? Eucasians?
Well, there's I guess there's several different dialects. There's different Siberian native peoples. I guess the primary group that we're going to be touching on here tonight is the Yakut, Yakut. And again, this area. It is extremely remote. It is very, very sparsely inhabited. Even the people who live in the area only live there transitionally. They're mostly nomads, or historically they've been mostly nomadic. I mean, this area we're talking about. Go ahead.
It's a basically unexplored, vast stretch of land.
It's about as unexplored as the Amazon. That's what they
Yes,
compare it to. And like
it-
what we're talking about
it's
is
mostly swamps and thick forests.
well, it's about 100,000 square kilometer area that consists of swamps and near impassable taigas. A taiga, Taiga, is a geological term for an area. It's basically coniferous forest. We know them mostly as evergreen forests that pretty much sit in a swamp. So you have very dense coniferous forests that probably few have ever felt the sting of an axe. And to top it all off, these trees are growing right in the swamp. So just to give and it's like minus 40 consistently up there.
Yeah, so like I mean, the bottom line to walk away with here is that it's not only is it fairly unexplored, but you can see why it's not an easy place to get to.
It's remote. It's inhospitable, and in terms of geology and the climate. So we're talking about basically a one of the last wild frontiers, woodland wild frontiers left on this planet. So I guess let's get down to business here.
Okay, so I mean, basically, when we're talking about the Valley of Death, one of the main things that you will find there, or people have found, are these domes. Now, the domes have been recorded by explorers and hunters all through the centuries.
Gold panners. The history of this place is just rampant. I mean, the history goes back over 1,000 years in this area, but mostly we're dealing with the traditions. The history that we do get is mostly oral tradition, because these people really didn't have any form of writing, probably up until recent times. And I would imagine that literacy is probably still a very small fraction of literate people.
Well, the oral tradition is a way that a lot of smaller cultures have passed down their history and folklore and stuff like that. In fact, it is very, very big in folklore. Now, these domes, it's not like, I mean, it's not as you would expect. Like that's kind of a buzz term on these things, but really, what makes them amazing is that they're kind of like houses.
Yeah.
Right? Like they found these, basically they assume them to be copper because they have a reddish color. But they're not. In fact, people have tried denting them, cutting off fragments with all different kinds of tools. The end result being that they couldn't even dent it. They couldn't make any impression that they had done anything to it, no matter what they tried. So as of this time, it's basically referred to as an unknown metal.
Yes.
And yes.
And nobody has ever been able to acquire a sample. And interestingly enough, over the years, though, it's been these domes. I mean, they're not like, we're not talking a figment of somebody's imagination or a story here. I mean, these domes were written about by archaeologists, geologists, Russian scientists. Their existence has been verified, has been recorded. But the extreme feat of finding one of these domes that you have stumbled across by accident, because most of these expeditions that have been led up there, we're talking years after the fact. They stumbled across it. They weren't equipped to do any studying on the objects, and left, came back later, and the area had completely flooded. The geology had changed. The vegetation in the area there's were accounts where they've gone back afterwards, and the vegetation is just completely overgrown everywhere, where you couldn't see further than 10 feet in front of yourself.
Yes, and that's something I read as well. In fact, what I've read to be, especially from modern accounts, because people they still have teams that go out on expeditions trying to locate these domes, and it takes a lot of planning, and one of the things that the biggest challenges is actually locating them.
Yeah.
I mean, they know that they're along the river, but like you said, the grass and stuff like that has just gotten so tall and so thick that it's very, very hard to find.
Exactly. So, I mean, I guess let's just talk a little bit about the domes themselves. I mean, they're described as being, 9 to 12 meters in diameter. So,
And it's an unnatural metal. And it has a hole in the top that has a winding staircase going inside, where there are several rooms. And I guess nobody knows the civilization or the people that use these things, where they came from. Even if it's our own species, it's debatable at this point. But nevertheless, these things, they were obviously used as some kind of house. And the most amazing thing, as you mentioned earlier, like out around this area is like constantly 40 below.
yeah.
But people who have gone inside have reported being quite warm despite the fact that there's no heat. There's no electrical whatever inside. It's just, you're just inside of it.
And yeah, exactly. Now, curiously, the people in the area, they do refer to them as iron homes or iron huts. I guess it would be kind of premature for us to draw any conclusions right off the bat, but it would definitely would appear that they are some kind of a house-like structure. These domes are sometimes seen, because most of the time we're only seeing either the rim of the hole poking out of the swamps, out of the mud, or sometimes just a few feet of the very top of the dome.
That's true. I mean, it's even been debated whether or not there were UFOs that have crashed.
Exactly. And in some instances, some of these domes that have been, some of the records that people have made about their journeys and visits to these domes, they've flat out stated that, though they've read other accounts where people have seen stairways that led down, that some of the domes that people have entered have just been just a dome, and there was no apparent access to anywhere deeper. Whereas there was this I guess the one account of an elderly gentleman and his daughter who spent the night in one, and the one that they had stumbled across was had a spiral staircase. I believe it had 4 rooms, comprised of the same metal material. Sometimes some of these domes that are higher above the swamplands are described as having vertical supports, almost like the dome, the actual sides of the dome proper. I guess the conical part of the dome has vertical supports, almost like struts that that line that surround the structure altogether. The walls are described as being about around 2 inches thick. Now, interestingly, I haven't been able to find any accounts of whether or not the metal is magnetic, or what's referred to, I guess, as ferrous. Whether ferrous or non-ferrous, whether we're able to stick a magnet onto it, and if that magnet would adhere, because I guess that would it would give us a little information.
Well, there is an interesting story that I've come across where basically a small group that went out searching for these domes have come across what they described as a magnetic mountain. Now, I'll get to that after. Because right now, I'd like to just get a little bit of history about where these things came from, and detail a little bit about it before we really jump into the messed up stuff. 'Cause
Okay.
so right now we got a general idea like where these things are. We know that nobody knows where they came from, including the local nomads and.
And we're not talking like a city of domes that are just sitting,
No,
on
no,
the
no.
edge. We're talking that within this 100,000 square kilometer area, there's just random domes randomly interspersed around this area and not just domes but other bizarre metal objects as well.
And like the locals, the Yakutians, if I pronounced that right, sorry if I didn't, but they associate them apparently with ancient demons of the Tiaga,
Yes.
and who they refer to. And again, I apologize if my pronunciation is way off, but they call them Niurgan Booter and Tang Dural, and that's Niurgunbootur and Tongdurral. Now they have a history. They have folklore and legends that go way back, where they describe like almost like a tornado, or not a tornado, but like
A
fiery,
whirlwind of fire.
yeah, a whirlwind of fire, and that came out of these things. In fact, I don't know if you read the whole story. Did you read like the whole?
Oh, I'm over the last several years, of course, I'm very interested in Siberian domes. In fact, Nirgun Butur is the name. It literally translates into fiery champion.
Okay.
And they thought of them as almost like a protector for their tribe. And the other character, I guess, they mentioned was kind of his enemy, though neither a being or entity was said to be a great god or creator. They did speak of them as in terms of in ideas of demons, or there's a tradition of a giant, fiery giant that lives beneath these holes, and this, which is something else I guess we'll get into, because on top of the domes, there's of course many anomalous shafts that just disappeared. They're just yawning chasms that go straight down into the bog and disappear. Just they seem to go on forever. And it's some of the local traditions is that a fiery giant lives down there, and sometimes belches out smoke and fire.
Now, didn't they also, like, according to the legend way back, didn't they also spy a city, like a strange city, in the middle of all of this?
Well, I guess to start, we can go right back to like the very remote past of the area. There were a group of nomads known as the Tungus. And their local legend that at the beginning of their time in this area, or the beginning of when this weirdness first started. We're talking well over 1,000 years ago, maybe 2,000 years ago. The Tungus nomads, their oral tradition was that their land was enveloped in darkness. The whole 100,000 square kilometer basin was just completely enveloped in darkness. You couldn't see into it. And it was preceded by all these loud sounds, booms, otherworldly roars, lightning, extreme, like hurricane force winds just tearing through the area. And then after when the darkness subsided and it faded away, according to their oral traditions, there was a large vertical structure that stood in the center of this. Everything had been scorched, like the land, the entire valley had been scorched and burned away. And now standing in the middle of this was this enormous vertical structure.
Oh, yes, this is the structure, I believe, that slowly sank into the ground with a high-pitched sound.
And yeah, exactly. And well, immediately this ear-splitting sound seemed to roar out of this structure. And over time, days, weeks is not really specific. The tower begins to sink into the ground, and it leaves a large hole in the ground. And in the specific words of the legend, because the speech and the language of these people is quite curious. The words that they choose to use for things, and they described it that the hole was 3 tiers, and I'm quoting now, of laughing chasms.
Yeah, that is an interesting term, laughing chasms.
Laughing chasms is how they, yeah, exactly. Now, as their tradition goes, that far below, down in this hole, was an underground country that had its own sun, but for whatever reason, the sun was waning. And I mean, for those of you who search, and I guess pay attention to the alternative world, I mean, that to me, I mean, that definitely sounds like another Hollow Earth myth if I ever heard one.
Yeah, and
or
there are
Hollow
quite a
Earth
few.
story. Sorry, go ahead.
There are quite a few stories of the Hollow Earth as well.
Well, it's funny. No matter where you go, whether it's Brazil or Eskimos way up north, people on the equator, people over in Siberia, people down in the Amazon jungle, everywhere you get these stories. Hopi Indians, right? North American natives in general. Stories of people who came from a world beneath our world, a inner Earth, if you will.
Yeah, and actually there are there was a couple things found at the near the domes by local hunters and I guess explorers over the centuries that have been reported that to me do sound incredibly alien. But before we get into that,
I guess we'll just finish off the legend portion of it.
yeah,
So, this tower sinks down below the ground, leaving this hole that, as tradition states, is the entrance to the Hollow Earth. However, a choking stench constantly belched out of this hole that was so terrible that no one inhabited the area for a very long time. Now,
yeah, because they left and came back.
oh
Like,
yeah, there was after that point there was a they would observe the valley from a distance, but it was 600 years before people really moved back into the area. So as stated by the legends, above above the hole, sometimes they would peer what they referred to as rotating islands that would float above the hole.
it almost sounds like a fantasy video game.
It really does. I mean, this is it's a pretty. So I mean, when I think of 1,000-year-old native Siberians looking up in the sky and seeing a great disk rotating in the air above this hole, I mean, a rotating island. I mean, that makes perfect sense. It was sometimes referred to as the banging lid, but that's something I guess we'll circle back to in a moment. So, according to legend, centuries pass, hundreds of years pass before eventually just a ball of fire, a flaming sphere, just erupts out of the hole, and it soars across the sky. It leaves a streak of fire behind it.
Now, yes, this was very interesting because people who have like eyewitnesses, not just from that location, but there was a couple of other villages and stuff around the area. where people have seen it, like the way it moved through the sky, its trajectory, and the way it changed. You see, because scientists believed, originally that this had been a meteorite, right?
Well, this event actually, I know what you're segueing towards. However, we're talking about something that happened probably 700 years before that, before that event. So the fireball, erupts out of the hole, and it streaks across the sky and disappears on the horizon. Now, they come to find out, according to their tradition, that the fireball actually came out. It bypassed their lands altogether and actually exploded over the village, or of a neighboring village of a hostile tribe. So that's where it began and this happened twice in their oral tradition. Where a fireball, the fireball came out and explodes over a neighboring village who is hostile towards this particular group of people. Now, they go on and this is where I guess the idea of him becoming kind of a guardian to them comes in, because this event happens 200 years, we'll say, after the pillar sank into the ground, and then 200 years later a fireball shoots out, and then a couple of decades later another fireball shoots out, and then the third time a fireball erupts out of the hole. However, this time it doesn't travel to the horizon. It explodes right over the hole.
Yes, and I believe this is where they...
Well, the hills in the area are cut with 100-meter deep cracks. After the explosion, and this is we're still talking ancient oral tradition here, the fire, what they refer to as a fire-raging sea, as they described, is swashed above the hole. Whatever, a fire-raging sea, I just picture
I picture lava.
Well, yeah, perhaps lava or plasma, because I believe that this was above the hole, because how they described it was that it would start as a pillar of fire that would come up out of the hole, and then at the very top of the pillar there'd be a larger ball of fire that then would travel away. But this time that ball of fire just exploded right at the top of the pillar. And once the explosion had happened and you could see again, they could see this like I said, as they described it, as a fire raging sea, which I kind of picture a giant cloud of burning energy, like plasma or something to that degree. And then they go on to describe that this rotating island sits above the fire-raging sea. Now, apparently, the effects of this particular explosion, it is felt out to 1,000 kilometers in all directions. And apparently, again, according to this oral tradition, survivors on the edge of the blast become ill with strong sickness that is eventually passed on to their children. So, we have this sickness and this explosion. I mean, the only thing in modern, the only modern event that we could really tie to this would be something akin to the explosion of a nuclear weapon, where
Yes.
you would have this sickness that would follow you through generations. Now, these people described it as being hereditary, that the sickness was, and though they didn't elaborate on exactly what the sickness was,
It like the symptoms do sound akin to radiation poisoning.
exactly, and that that according to these people, that it was, they passed on to their children. So perhaps these were genetic defects caused by exposure to exotic forms of radiation. So I mean, now we're at the point where that's kind of where we end with the legend, and now we fast forward 600 years.
Well, before we get into where it goes from there, because we're going to actually discuss why it's called the Valley of Death and discuss some more modern tales, stuff that we have been alive to see, and of course, some that we weren't a little earlier, like the Great Explosion of 1908.
Well, and as we're going to continue to see here is that the Great Explosion of 1908, the Tunguska explosion, was by no means an isolated event. That the reason, I guess, why I wanted to go so far back was to establish that in that area, 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 900 years ago, we have oral traditions of bizarre explosions that just devastate the region.
Yeah, and there's even more. I mean, there's some strange anomalous activity in that area anyway, even aside from that stuff. But before we get into that, we're going to take a short little break here, and during which I'm going to play for you my song, what the hell is it called? Esoterica. Yes, I will play Esoterica for you, and when we come back, we will discuss why it is called the Valley of Death, and a bunch of stories that are just really, really out there. The meat of the stuff I think you've all been waiting for. So with that, enjoy. At first sight, my soul was a mirror, my body a ceiling that kept dreaming the world's lullaby. One more machine they built to me, a shame, row by row. We drift like a river's flow, carried by whisper clouds and sleep spells. We gave up all control. The truth I sought, there must be more. I thought I cried, my eyes open and saw the world ignite. Armageddon's heading home, and our heads are buried in nothing. So tell me, what's rougher, brother? Sleep in summer, or awaken, taking what is going. The world's run by a handful. They line their pockets with their lives. Drafting us for hire. We're just And we're back. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, you can stream everything else and buy it on YouTube for iTunes, whatever. Go to www.doortoanima.com. Enjoy your stay, and now we're back to the meat of the story here. So let's talk about why they call it the Valley of Death. They call it the Valley of Death because, you know, it's associated, like, lots of people have died going there. You know, they were said, and this goes back to how we talked before about, like, symptoms of radiation poisoning, because people who went there and spent any significant amount of time, and I just want to point out that in modern times it's not necessarily true. Well, actually, for specific spots maybe, but back then, like, this whole area was kind of like this. But anyway,
well, even like you're stating, even going right back to our 1,000-2,000-year-old legends, you know, that area, it was said that, you know, after the tower was appeared, that, you know, a few brave tribesmen went down to go and investigate, and that anybody who investigated never returned.
Yeah, and, you know,
so
again,
very
like,
early in its, you know, in its history, right at the very beginning of the history of this area. As far
so
as
the obvious thing is that if it was nuclear related, it's something that, you know, obviously our mankind at that time did not have the technology to do it, which would also back the theory that this stuff was, you know, originated
in origin.
Exactly. So now to get back to the symptoms, people who spent any significant amount of time, and, like, to some degree this still has happened today in some of the stories I read, but, you know, you get very, very dizzy, sick, nauseous, and, you know, people who spent any real amount of time actually died.
Well,
you know?
and I mean, for anybody who you know, kind of finds that, you know, a little unbelievable, I can direct you actually to a modern expedition that was done by UFO hunters for the History Channel's Ancient Alien series.
Oh, that's interesting.
Who they actually went to the area. They used a parasail and a motorized fan to propel themselves, so they were basically flying through the air with a parachute and a giant fan, and to, you know, to scope out the area. They actually found while they were doing their reconnaissance, they discovered a perfectly circular depression in this one area. Like, it looked really strange, like it looked artificial. So they went and started walking around. Of course, it was filled with water up to their knees or deeper. But once they sent their probes down, you know, well, sticks, and they begin, you know, kind of poking around and doing some investigation, they were actually walking on top of what they thought was a metal object. And then not too far away, maybe 100 feet away from there, they found another site identical to it, and then another site again. And I believe, all told, they found 4 of these sites which had, they were assuming, sunken domes that had sunken below the swamp, and, you know, they were down probably about, you know, 3 feet, under 3 feet of water or more, you know, just to get to the top of them. And the people, they actually had to stop the expedition, because after they came to this area where they were almost positive there were domes, and they actually did get some anomalous magnetic readings from the area, that the team members started getting extremely ill. They became dizzy, disoriented. They couldn't stand or walk. They couldn't swallow. They couldn't eat anything. And so, yeah, you know, just go and search it up. There was a whole little video there that pretty much details their well, I won't say botched attempt, but, you know, that's pretty much what it was. It was another of a long list of attempts of actual researchers who are looking to probe deeper into this mystery. But then, at every turn, there seems to be something.
Yeah, and that story sounds, it was kind of a similar outcome from a small group of people that I read. In fact, they had first initially wanted to take like a helicopter and go out and because simply put, like we mentioned very early in the episode, it's very, very hard to find these domes because they're scattered throughout this huge, vast area, and the grass and everything is so thick. So, they couldn't really afford a helicopter, but they were told that it was along the river, right? So what they ended up doing was they hired this guy who was like a survivalist. Basically, they hired him to hunt and like, if worst came to worst, this guy could get the necessities, so they didn't starve or die, because none of these people really believed the legends. They just wanted to find, like, they knew that the domes existed, right?
The domes had been, the existence of the domes had been verified by, I believe it was an archaeologist or a geologist. I can't remember exactly now.
Yeah, so like these guys basically, they got in a raft, and the raft, what they would do is they would sail down the river for so far, and when they found like a spot that looked promising, they'd pull off, set up camp, and they'd spend 2 or 3 days kind of like they'd break up into teams and search the area.
Because I guess it's worth mentioning too that to find these domes, some of them which reportedly were completely sunken below the bog, reportedly in every case where these domes were found, it was also surrounded by anomalous vegetation.
Yeah, in fact, some of the domes have reportedly completely vanished, leaving behind circular depressions filled with, very, very anomalous vegetation. So anyway, these guys, they had the survivalist guy with them, a guy that don't believe in any of this crap, right? He's a hunter. He's a very, non-believer of paranormal or any of that kinds of stuff. And this guy, even he was put off, very shortly on their journey. They're going down this river surrounded on each side by tons of dead trees, broken trees, upturned, and tall dead grass everywhere. And he actually abandoned them very, very quickly on their journey. And of course, they still want to go, so they pressed on. Anyway, they get to this point where they find what looks to be in the distance, it looks to be one of these domes that they were so hard trying to find. And they kind of celebrated that night because it was really late, and they just broke out some alcohol, whatever. And then the next day, they were still kind of probing the area they were in as well. And the weather started to get kind of bad, and when it didn't let up, they were like, screw it, we got to push on and get to this now. But what they discovered was, after having slept so close to this thing, was that, again, like, the people got sick. In particular, one of the team members, again, just like how you mentioned, he couldn't stand up. He was very dizzy, nauseous. He couldn't eat, choking. And, when it didn't, like, he gave it a full day for it to kind of ease off, and it didn't. And that's when they all kind of grouped together and got out as fast as they could. And what's interesting is that guy, he or one of his team members, lost his hair within a month, which again goes with radiation poisoning. And the other one developed 2 pustules on his cheek, which never healed. And that one I can't say is related to radiation. I really don't know what it is, but it sounds strange nonetheless.
Well, actually, bizarre skin lesions are not uncommon in radiation victims. And I guess, if we're talking about alien technology, there's many different types of radiation. And some of them are ionizing radiation, some are non-ionizing. Some are much more energetic. And if we're talking about alien technology, well, we could be dealing with an extremely exotic form of radiation, one that maybe doesn't affect the body in a consistent manner. Maybe it only affects people of certain gene types. Radiation's a funny thing, and when you're
Well,
dealing with an unknown source of it, it could be definitely could be an unknown. The radiation itself could be just as alien as the technology.
well, while we're talking about the fact that it's probably alien technology, because like we mentioned earlier, these people seen these. Well, they've experienced radiation poisoning and some kind of things happening that as far as we know, our we didn't have the technology at the time, so that's a strong contender to back up the idea that this is alien in origin. But to further, bring that point home, there was a hunter who in 1971 came across these domes, and he claimed to have found, and I'm sure you've probably read this in other related stories, but these skinny black bodies, each of which featured only one eye, and they were dressed in what was perceived to be iron costumes. Now,
Well, exactly, and in fact, I mean, if we just rewind a little bit and go back to the idea of just the long-standing history of this place, many of the places, the rivers, the geological features have very what I found to be very curious names. I'll just go through a couple. We have Cauldron Stream, Iron House, and these are literal translations from the language, the Yakut language. Another one, Place with a Cauldron, because that's how they referred to these domes, as cauldrons.
yeah.
The large cauldron sank. Holes in the ground, Fiery Champion. Place with a three-sided harpoon, and there's a specific river called Iron People,
Oh, that is interesting.
which is actually the river on which this elderly gentleman that you're speaking of, where he discovered this dome and found this small black-skinned one-eyed creature dressed in iron clothing. Now, I guess it's worth to note that this guy, he tried to get people to come and see it.
Oh yeah, and nobody would hear of it, and then he died. Yeah, he was almost, I think, ostracized for the whole thing. And going back now, remember how you were talking about the pillar, that sank into the ground, and like it ended up becoming a hole in which like the local tribe witnessed like either lava or plasma shooting out of it onto their enemies'
Well,
tribe.
and that's what they call that hole, is what they call the Fiery Champion. That's what that hole is called. Now, its actual native language name is, like you said, is Nirgun Butor. But that's the literal the literal translation would be Fiery Champion.
Well, what's interesting about it is that one of the researchers believes that the domes are somehow connected to a type of power source deep within the Earth that act as a weapon to protect our planet from outer space threats. And he believes that is what shot down the Tunguska meteorite in 1908, the Chilium meteorite in 1984, and the Sidon meteorite in 2002. And he also believes that the radiation levels in the area are rising to such a high level that the wildlife is actually leaving the area.
Yep.
Now, I mean, just thinking about, we have a hole where some fiery substance has been noted and reported to have shot out of it, throughout history. I mean, what if? Right?
And it's interesting to note that even as recent as 2011, there was the Irkutsk, Irkutsk meteorite that some believe may have been another one of these, well, since 1908, would be the fourth meteorite that has been shot down. Now, it's interesting to also note that the Chelum of 1984 followed the same path as the Tunguska meteorite 1908, almost exactly the same trajectory.
Now, one thing that seems to be true for all, it seems to be true for all kinds of paranormal activity is that, and you can look at like the Bermuda Triangle or the Devil's Triangle, but all these areas kind of share something with magnetic fields. Like it's anomalous. Like people's, their compasses and stuff like that go wild. And of course we know that magnetic, fields and stuff like that can actually interfere with our brain chemistry. And so that same group that I mentioned there just a moment ago that went upstream and found the domes and got sick or whatever, they also discovered a circular field of rust-colored boulders. And in the area of these boulders, their compasses went haywire, which is why they thought that it was a magnetic mountain. And I just find it, is interesting just because, again, like when you have anomalous areas, they all seem to have these magnetic anomalies.
Well, exactly. You've seen it at Skinwalker Ranch. Many other places seem to exhibit strange magnetic properties. And well, I guess I'll adding something to the. Because, I have read perhaps the same report that was written by this individual who, believes that through, research and according to this person, past life regression, that they've determined themselves that, it's an Atlantean power grid of sorts, or an alien power grid that's powering some kind of a defense system. And something that may actually lend a little credence to that was that, during the 1950s, the Soviet military began nuclear testing in the area. And I believe they detonated, upwards to a dozen nuclear devices in that area. I guess choosing it because of its remoteness and
yes,
it's so sparsely habited.
No, we're talking about the Soviet military in the 1950s, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so I just wanted to point out that many of these things that we've previously said, because like you're going to link nuclear bombs to radiation, but happened before this ever happened.
So yeah, we're talking the 50s. A lot of these events that we're talking about happened right up into like the 30s and the 40s with this mysterious sickness. And I mean, not to mention that we went all the way back to 2,000 years ago, where the place initially got its name. It was the Valley of Death, and people, this strange sickness that spread out and just killed everyone off.
Now, what's interesting about the explosions is that, again, like it's anomalous because, like you said, they were detonating these bombs, and for reasons unexplained, their 10 megaton bomb produced an explosion that was equal to 20 or 30 megatons.
Yeah, which is
now
2,000 to 3,000 times the expected yield, right? Like when you're talking megaton explosion, it's not just a simple jump. Like that's 2,000 times the expected yield of an explosive device. A 20 to 30 megaton explosion that was detected by seismological institutes all over the world.
And I mean, like they can't explain it now. I mean, that's just how would you explain that, right? I mean, again, it's just one of those things that makes this area interesting. And to go back and what we were talking about before, the Great Tunguska Explosion, where basically an absolutely massive explosion occurred, which rivaled that of even the island of Krakatoa. Which
it was also known to be the most violent volcanic eruption in man's recorded history.
Yeah, I mean, it totally wiped out everybody in that location. So and it was also more powerful than like the Hiroshima and the Nagasaki atomic bombs. And despite destroying an entire forest and knocking down thousands of trees for countless miles in a 360-degree radius, mind you, it did not kill a single human being. Now, isn't that something, right?
Now,
And
and though that's very impressive, in an area as remote and as unpopulated as this region, I mean, it's not completely unheard of. But I guess for me, the most interesting aspect of Tunguska was its complete lack of a impact site.
yeah, well, apparently the explosion, it was said to have happened like before it hit the ground.
Oh,
In fact,
far
yeah,
above.
like apparently the explosion. With the explosion came a massive pillar of fire, which was visible from hundreds of miles away. And with that, there came roaring thunderclaps, which were said to be heard even farther away, like 500 miles away. And the soaring heat was felt by residents of Vanavara, which was a small trading post 40 miles away. I mean, can you imagine feeling heat 40 miles away from this thing? Damage was also done to their town from the blast, which came in the form of a shockwave, which shattered windows, collapsed ceilings, tore up sods. And stranger than that was that the eyewitnesses claimed to have seen just before the blast, they claimed that a cigar-shaped object, which glowed an extremely bright bluish white, moved vertically downward for about 10 minutes. Prior to this, eyewitnesses claimed that they saw this thing as a fireball in the sky, streaking at a 10-degree angle just slightly east of true north. After that, it moved slightly north of due west, and this is significant because many scientists have wrote this off as a meteorite, but the trajectory and the way it changes does not fit the profile for a meteorite, comet, or other natural object. It was also unlikely to be an aircraft, as it was in 1908. So, like, it wasn't like they don't. I don't think that they even. It was like 1910 when the U.S. government conducted the first bombing experiments. So, we're talking about a time before this.
Before intercontinental ballistic missiles and before the wide use of any, or the use of any high altitude fast moving aircraft. It would have been completely anomalous for that time. And all the description of that event pretty much parallels. And I mean, I invite everybody to go out and try and dig up as much about the ancient legends of this area, and then like actually compare them to the description that you just heard from Will here. It's almost identical. Everything from the ball of fire, the streak, the three claps of thunder. Apparently in the area, soil samples even indicate they place these events of destruction at about 600 or 700 year intervals.
Yeah,
So we're talking about intervals of time that are even beyond, even for those of us who believe that our ancestors, that ancient man had access to technology far greater than what the history books say. It really makes you wonder that even humans with that kind of technology, would they be creating a system that I guess there's a lot of questions here. Is this thing malfunctioning, and like every 600 or 700 years, if it hasn't fired, it just fires, and sometimes it randomly takes out a settlement. Other times it doesn't. Because all throughout history, right, we have records of similar events happening all over the place, particularly at the equator. We have like during the same time frames where we see these explosions in Siberia. We see other similar events recorded by Aboriginal peoples in many equatorial regions. you know,
Well,
and if they, by doing the math, Tunguska was 1908. Before that, there was another event, a destructive event very similar to Tunguska, that was recorded, that happened back in 1380. And if you go back another 600 years, 700 years back from that, 830 AD, the Mayans, or the Mayans were mysteriously destroyed. Some of their cities, if you look, were completely obliterated. Some researchers even said that, from the vitrification that they see on the stone, that they determined that it was some sort of massive explosion, like a meteorite impact.
well, to go on, just going back again to the explosion, something that also speaks for extraterrestrial is that it's believed that next to where the explosion occurred is an extraterrestrial craft, and there's a lake right next to that called Baikal, is Baikal. And the lake is said to have 1,800 different species of plant and animal life, that yet over 1,000 of them are unique to the area. It does not exist anywhere else on Earth. The lake also has a lot of history regarding mythologies of strange races of mankind settled into unexplored and remote areas of Siberia. And these beings are not affected by cold weather, which of course we know that the area is famous for.
Yeah, be pretty handy to have in northern Siberia.
Yeah, and I actually we talked mostly about the Valley of Death, but Siberia itself has quite a few strange stories. I came across a couple of myself. Like did you know that they have their own version of Nessie called Labenkyre? And that being has been cited by many locals, and they claim to have seen many animals being dragged into the water, never to be seen again by whatever this thing is. And they've also claimed to have seen a Yeti, which was climbing the Altai Mountains in 2003, and they discovered a severed paw that was covered in fur and everything like that. But when it was studied, the bones were said to be several thousand years old, yet the limb itself looked to be very human, despite the fact that it had hair and it had a paw. I guess they're referring to like the anatomy and size.
The bone
and
structure, yeah.
Yeah, and and there was this other story I read about the exhumation of a mummified woman who is referred to as the Ice Maiden. She wasn't a traditional mummy. What mummified her was her body was actually preserved by water that seeped into her burial chamber as it froze. And after the exhumation, there was an outbreak of suicides and sickness with people who've been around and came into contact with this thing. And it was such a widespread that the locals made a big fuss about it to get her reburied. And the archaeologists and their team spoke of bad feelings and nightmares after they dug it up. And one of the helicopters that was used to transport the Ice Maiden actually crash landed. So, how's that for a mummy's curse?
Yeah, that's
right?
pretty good. Hard to explain away a helicopter crash with mold.
Yeah, and and one of the other strange stories was, there was this woman who heard a voice which told her to go to a cemetery. And so she went to, I guess, the nearest cemetery or whatever, and she found a small creature in a grave that had claws, large eyes, ears instead of holes where the ears would be, and its skin was gray with brown spots. Now, despite finding the creature in a grave, it was apparently alive, and the woman actually took care of it until she had some kind of mental breakdown, and she went to a mental hospital.
It sounds like she had the mental breakdown first.
Yeah, and anyway, she ended up, or the creature died while she was in there, I guess because they had nothing to look after her, but there were a lot of rumors floating around that the creature was alien and later taken by a UFO, but it's believed by skeptics that it was a premature female that had severe deformities. But yeah, it's still pretty messed up. And I mean, how odd that the woman gets it, has a mental breakdown, and she dies trying to escape the hospital, and yeah, it's just a whole bunch of weirdness. So I mean, I think that I've said all that I want to say on the Siberian domes at this point. I think we covered the main.
Well, I mean, I guess the only other thing to touch on is that, I guess, would be the fact that, well, I guess the facts in general. I mean, the facts are there are domes there. The fact is there people do get sick when they visit the area and acquire, either very visible maladies from their visits. The fact is that a 10 megaton bomb was detonated, which resulted in a 20 to 30 megaton explosion. The fact is that there are magnetic anomalies in the area, recordable. The facts are that there is spikes in background radiation in areas that were not even, not even near where the testing was being done. Those are the facts. We touched on a lot of conjecture. As that's our show. I mean, that is the nature of the paranormal. But
at the end of the day, I think what it comes down to is that we have a couple of ingredients that are common to a lot of the most strange places on Earth. And what we're talking about there is that, at least in my mind, is wherever there are anomalous magnetic fields, we have anomalies. Right? I mean, you can...
Physical, very blatant physical in this world anomalies, not just, well, I seen a weird light or a strange shape, that could be explained as magnetic fields that are playing tricks on our eyes or on our brains.
Hell, if you take the magnetic fields with you, you have anomalies. Look at the Philadelphia experiment, right?
Exactly. We know that the electromagnetic spectrum is a very powerful tool, and mankind, at least in the civilian world, has only very, very, very at the very beginnings of unlocking its secrets.
Yes, and that said, even what we know is nothing, because we all know that they're being secretly worked on by private corporations and government. So, I have no doubt in my mind that they probably have working anti-gravonics. I'm sure that they have this stuff, but we're not going to see it, at least anytime soon. Just like fuel, when you're talking about fuel for a car, we all use gas and oil. You know that they got stuff that don't use any of that, but again, it wouldn't, they'd lose too much money.
And maybe if we can get some expeditions going up to Siberia, we can find out what's powering these alien defense systems and cut down on my electric bill.
No doubt. So, again, if you guys have any, because basically every week we try to think of something that we find very interesting and we do a show on it. But you guys are the ones listening to it. So if you have something that you think is interesting, and I don't care what it is, if it's a ghost, myth, cryptozoology, UFO, as long as it fits with the theme of the show, we would be more than happy to research it, do a show on it. It'd be exciting for us too. And again, if you have stories or like I said, anything media related that's weird or strange that fits with the theme, go to our site, go to the submission section, and just see how to send it to us, and we'll post it, talk about it. So again, visit our site at www.effed, effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. And again, you can email this stuff to me or Ryan at will@effedupstories.com or ryan@effedupstories.com. So thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're finding that it's stranger than the normal paranormal, because that's kind of what we strive to do. And that's it for me.
And again, thanks everyone for listening. This is Ryan Sharp signing out.
Later, guys.